Hello everyone and welcome to the second lesson in social influence. In today's lesson we're going to be talking about factors affecting conformity. To start off with, see if you can test yourself on these keywords. If you were in a lesson, I would ask you to grab a whiteboard or I will explain through how you could revise these with a friend on the next slide. If you are watching this video alone, what you could do is create a set of flashcards with these sets of keywords. Or you could look through the list and test yourself to see how many of these you could define. As in the specification, you need to know the three different types of conformity, which are compliance, identification, and internalization. You also need to know the two different explanations of conformity, which are normative social influence and informational social influence. We talked about these in the first video in social influence. We also went through 4 research methods keywords. As a bit of a challenge, see if you can define these. These are deception, confederate, critical trial, and stimulus. Okay, pause the video here to test yourself. If you are revising with a friend, what you could do is do a game which I call Keyword Guess Who. In your pairs, you could take it in turns to select a keyword from the list below to define. Your partner then has to guess what it is, and then they select a keyword, and you go backwards and forwards. Today's lesson is going to be about factors affecting conformity. First thing we need to do is to recap Ash's 1951 study, which we covered in the previous video. We're then going to outline 3 variations of Ash's study with reference to group size, unanimity, and task difficulty, and the effects of these 3 variations on conformity. We're also going to evaluate Ash's study, which we started to do last lesson, but I'm going to give you a lot more information on the evaluation here, more than you could possibly need, but it's good practice for research methods. When we check the spec for social influence, we can see that we are up to the second lesson, which is variables affecting conformity, and Ash is named in the specification because Ash's lines is a key study. This means that you could get a question that specifically asks you to outline and evaluate Ash's study. You could specifically get asked questions on these 3 variations on Ash's research as well. Okay, so group size, unanimity, and task difficulty are all named in the specification. You need to be ready for a question that specifically asks you about any of these 3 or Ash's original research. Okay, as a recap on Ash's experiment, I've set this up, obviously these are the slides which I use for a lesson, so I would have people get into pairs, and partner 1 explain the aims and procedures, and partner 2 explain the results and conclusions. Obviously, if you're watching this alone, see how much you can remember of the aims, procedure, results, and conclusions of Ash's research. As a challenge, try to include the following keywords: deception, confederate, stimulus lines, critical trials, compliance, and normative social influence. Okay, see, as a challenge, see if you include all of those words in your recap. Okay, in this lesson, like I said, we're going to be talking about 3 factors affecting conformity. I have color-coded these to match the color coding which you see on this, so the background of the slides will be these colors. If you haven't tried it already, I would suggest taking notes on this using a mind map layout, like I'm showing you on the screen here, and color coding the different factors affecting conformity. See how that works with taking notes and how readable you find the notes afterwards. Okay, we're going to start with group size. The question we're going to be answering is the group size of the group more important than the agreement of the group? Okay, as you might remember, in Ash's original variation, there were 5 confederates used alongside the participant. In the group size variation, they started with 1 confederate, so just the participant and another person judging the line lengths, and then they added more confederates to see how big the group needed to be to have the most levels of conformity reached. There were very low conformity rates with just 1 confederate, and conformity rose to just over 30% with 3 confederates, but then this effect leveled off. And it's easy to see in this graph. Okay. Think about how you would word the conclusion from this research. So try to finish the sentence. This suggests that. Okay, so this suggests that group size, increasing group size increases conformity. However, this effect levels off after a majority of 3. Next up, if we were in the class, what I would get you to do is to use textbook, page 18 of the textbook, to find out the effect of unanimity and task difficulty on conformity. So for you to read through first and take some bullet points, and then I will recap on the next couple of slides. So pause the video here to have a little read on your own first, and then I will put it into much shorter words on the next couple of slides. And you can see here how you could look at how much I'm condensing down the massive amount of writing that you get in the textbook, and I sort of condense it down into easier to read bullet points. We don't ever need to copy anything word for word out of the textbook because the textbook's very wordy and we don't need that much detail. Okay, so always put things into your own words where you're reading it back and it will make sense to you. We're going to start off by going through unanimity. We're going to continue with unanimity even because we've already done group size. So, unanimity. The question we're going to be answering is what happens to conformity if we have someone who's on our side? So in Ash's original research, the group against the participant was unanimous. Everybody was giving the same incorrect answer. In the unanimity variation, Ash added a confederate that sometimes agreed with the group, but sometimes gave the correct answer. So they were sometimes on the side of the participant. We refer to this as being a dissenter, so someone who dissents against the group. They go against the group. Conformity was reduced by 1/4 in trials where the dissenter gave the correct answer. And again, see if you can finish the sentence. This suggests that. And finally, task difficulty. What if we're not sure of the answer? As you might remember in Ash's original research, the difference between the correct answer when comparing the comparison lines and the stimulus line, the answer was very obvious because the line lengths differed a lot. What Ash then did is he made the test more difficult. He made the stimulus line and the comparison lines more similar in length, so it wasn't very easy to judge which one was the same length. What do you think happened to conformity? Conformity, unsurprisingly, increased under these conditions. Which explanation for conformity is happening here? It's informational social influence. We talked about the fact that in the original study, because the answer was obvious, the reason why people may conform to the same incorrect answer is just to fit in, to be liked, which we know is normative social influence. In this instance, the participants might be conforming to find the correct answer. So it would be them conforming for informational social influence. Okay, so you will have a copy of the exam question booklet, which I've given you for social influence. At this point, I would suggest you close your notes and then turn to page 2 of the exam question booklet to try question 4. This is a short answer question. If you wanted to try it timed, you could try it with a timer of 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Okay, next up we need to evaluate Ash's research, and we did begin doing this last lesson. As a reminder, you only need 3 evaluation points for each topic, because you will need 3 peel paragraphs if you were to get a 16 marker on that topic. What I am going to do is talk you through a massive amount of evaluation for Ash's research so that I can talk you through these different keywords. So it's something which, even if you just pick 3 and then listen to the rest and practice using the keywords in this way, this will still help with your revision. So on the board now, we have 3 blue bubbles with key terms in them. Okay. See if you can define these 3 key terms. They should be the most familiar to you. If you would like a challenge, you can try the purple key terms. Even though we do use them quite frequently, they are more complex. If you're struggling with any of them, See if you can break these key terms down to guess a meaning. Okay, pause the video here to have a go at these keywords. Okay, next up, before I put the next couple of slides on, think about how we could use these keywords in relation to Ash's experiment. So what was the reliability like in Ash's experiment? Do we think it was valid? Were there any ethical issues, for example? Okay, just to recap you on the definitions, although by now I'm sure you are very familiar. Validity is measuring what we think we're measuring. Essentially, is the ruler that we're using correct? I always talk about the ruler example of measuring my computer screen with the same ruler, and the ruler keeps telling me that the computer screen is 3 centimeters wide. Obviously, the ruler is not correct because my computer screen is much wider than that. But it means that the results would be reliable using this ruler because I would get the same results every time, but the results would not be valid because they're not measuring what we think we're measuring. Okay, so validity is measuring what we think we're measuring. Reliability is being able to replicate the results, being able to repeat them. When we talk about reliability, we don't always mean that the results have been replicated. Sometimes we can talk about the fact that in lab experiments, it would be easy for us to test the reliability of the results. And I'll talk more about that in a moment. We can also talk about ecological validity, which is specifically, is the experiment true to real life? Okay. Are we measuring real life behavior with these methods? We can also talk about temporal validity, which is essentially, are the results valid throughout time? Are we measuring true human behavior as a universal rule, or are we just measuring behavior that happened, say, back in the 1950s, which is when Ash's research took place? We also need to consider cultural relativism, which is the idea that behavior can only be understood in the context of the culture. Ash's research used only American participants, and we have to consider how conformity might look different in other cultures, particularly collectivist cultures. Okay, I'm not going to talk you through these evaluation points in quite a wordy way. As a reminder, don't feel like you need to take all of these notes down if you are writing notes from this. You only need 3 evaluation points. From the last video, you already have these. But it's a good way for us to practice these key terms with a familiar experiment. So Ash has a strong scientific method in his research. He has a standardized procedure which is easily replicable. Okay, standardized meaning it follows the same instructions every time. It's very easy to replicate, so it's easy to repeat this experiment, and we've proved that because I've replicated it in the lesson before. This means that we can easily test the reliability of the results. We also need to talk about temporal validity as a weakness to Ash's experiment. It's thought that Ash's results may have been a product of their time. Perrin and Spencer repeated Ash's original study in the UK in the 1980s and found that only 1 student conformed in nearly 400 trials. It's thought this may be due to change in social norms between the 2 times. So we have to think about the context of the 1950s. 1950s America was a more conformist time and place because there were post-war attitudes of everybody working together. Because of this, people would not want to go against the group. This suggests the results do not have temporal validity, which means they may not be applicable to modern behaviour. If we tried this again now, in obviously 2024, when I'm recording this video, it's likely that we wouldn't see, but it's thought that we wouldn't see very much conformity. Okay, next up, if you would like some more information on using the rest of these key terms to form some evaluation points on Ash's research, remembering you only need 3, then you can have a go at looking at page 19 of the Green-Haired Girl book. I will talk through domain characteristics on the next slide. Okay, we'll pause the video here if you want to go away and look at the textbook. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little refresher on domain characteristics. Domain characteristics are any aspect of the experiment that make the participant feel like we are demanding something of them. So characteristics that give the participant a cue to guess the aims of the research and feel like a behaviour is being demanded from them. This can then lead to participant reactivity. Okay, so if demand characteristics are present in an experiment, participants may notice this, feel that something's being demanded of them, and then they react in a particular way. Okay, so they change their behaviour based on the demand characteristics. It's important to note that sometimes they can try to help the experiment, sometimes they try to ruin the experiment. Obviously, don't write about this in your exam, but within the psychology world, we refer to this as the helping hand or the screw you. So participants working out the aims of the experiment sometimes try to give a helping hand and sway their own results to go with what they think the researcher wants. Others turn around and think, screw you, I can behave how I want, I'm not going to do what you want me to. And so they would then try to purposely go against what they think the researcher is expecting. Okay, either way, it affects the validity of the results because we're not measuring what we think we're measuring. We also need to talk about ethical issues. So obviously deception was used, participants were lied to and told that it was an experiment on visual perception. And participants were not protected from harm because of this deception. They would have been embarrassed if they, when they found out that they conformed and that people were judging them for, people were judging their ability to conform. Participants were misled and put in an embarrassing situation. However, we do have to consider the fact that they did give a debrief afterwards, which makes the deception more reasonable because they were told about it afterwards. And we also need to consider, most importantly, that the British Psychological Society guidelines were not introduced until 1958. Okay, so the idea of deception and protection from harm was not in guidelines until far after Ash completed his research. So Ash's research, by nowadays standards, would be considered unethical, but at the time wouldn't have been. Okay, on the next slide, I'm going to show you 3 statements, see if you think they are true or false, and correct them if you think they're false. Statement 1, a unanimous group produced a higher level of conformity than a group with a dissenter. That is true. On trials with a dissenter, conformity was reduced by 1/4. Statement 2, Ash varied group size and found there was little difference to conformity rate beyond a majority of 2. This is false. It's beyond a majority of 3. And finally, in Ash's original study, the Confederates sometimes gave the correct response. This is true. Confederates only gave the same incorrect response on critical trials. This is when the results were being measured. For the rest of the time, they gave the correct answer. Okay, this brings us to the end of today's session. Thank you very much for watching. I hope this was helpful and I hope you have a good day.